so welcome back everyone to the What School Could Be Academy Day 3. All right, so Ben, shall we get them started over in the Padlet right away?
Sure. Let me drop that link. I put it on the second slide, so if you you're going to be sharing on your end, just hit slide 2. I put it in the chat, everybody, and Justin's going to throw it up on the screen so you can zap that QR code, joining whichever way you want. Sometimes people like to join on their phone or their iPad and then have their computer free and clear to watch.
All right, super. So while you are over there in the Padlet, we want to begin to just get you out in discussion right away. If you somewhat remember, we left off last week sort of asking for some patience around PBL. And I'm going to want to pick back up around that question of patience around PBL. But before we do that, we just thought we'll get you all talking, get some conversation going to start the day. And so I think we'll just tee up breakout rooms with a fairly sort of basic conversation. Just here's our Academy format. Remember, participatory, we love cameras on, mics muted, engaged in chats, using lots of reactions in the chat. You know, just hammer away at the chat the whole time. We love it. Respectful and supportive, and you know, put out shared resources, stuff like that. Remember, you all are really good at what you do, and so we're just sort of guiding what is a group of amazing professionals that are, you guys have lots of resources, so share away. Okay, so with all that said, we want to, before we even do that, I just want to throw you out into breakout rooms, and I want to sort of start with the question in breakout rooms around why are we not seeing sort of more success with PBL. You know, if you're in this world of deeper learning, you've seen PBL, it's amazing, it's wonderful, all of the great things about it. But how come this is not just going gangbusters all over the place, and it is sort of the default practice that we see in schools? Let's get started a little bit around some of limitations around PBL, and maybe as we wrap up strategic patience, sort of thinking from a leadership standpoint, where we are around it. Does that make sense? So just like, why aren't we seeing more PBL like en masse all over the place? And then that'll get us in a good headspace, get us talking, get energy going for our discussion and work today. Okay.
All right. I got some rooms created. I'll open them. Are you ready for me to open them?
Yeah. Go for it. All right. Go ahead and have that conversation.
We got about 4 people in every room. I think that's a good. You want to do 4? Or you want to do smaller? I think 4 is pretty good.
4 sounds perfect. Yeah. 4 sounds perfect.
All right, great.
And we don't have anywhere to take notes. Just have a great conversation and then bring some of those ideas back into the room. When we get back to whole group, put them in chat. Okay. Sorry to cut off, which was awesome conversation to get going. Thank you all for jumping in and engaging and just getting the juices going right off the bat here. What are some of our big limitations? Just quick bite summaries, like 5-10 second summaries of some stuff you said out in breakouts.
Yeah, just come off mute.
Yeah, it's okay.
Christine mentioned.
Go ahead,
Christine mentioned a very important point, which is creativity. Like for you to design a whole curriculum based on projects, it requires a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation. And it's not an easy process for educators to do that.
Mm-hmm. Talked about too that they want to do it. Our learners want to do it, but sometimes it's that fear, that mindset of letting go, and again, the time, space, and resources to do it well.
Our group also talked about the fear sometimes that adults have of, will they be able to do this successfully? How does this interact with other accountability measures like testing? But also have been very inspired when we've seen educators tackle this on because of the excitement and collaboration we see from young people.
Yay, awesome. Lovely. And I'm sure there was amazing other ones, and feel free to throw them in the chat, like a lot of other sort of strategic kinds of limitations around why we don't see like this mass proliferation of PBL, even though that we know the research says this is a really good thing to do. And there's just a lot of reasons we should be doing it, but we just don't see this sort of mass usage of PBL. So I want to provide a piece of the puzzle here that that I think is important to understand as you try to lead deeper learning work. And we left off with this on Thursday, and I just want to circle back around. Let me jump back over into share screen. So remember, we had left off with we're going to exercise strategic patience when it comes to PBL. And I want to show you what strategic patience looks like a little bit and why you are exercising strategic patience with PBL. To the creativity point, I think that's completely valid, like that you're asking teachers to do a completely new kind of thing. That said, we're not stuck with not having any project examples to do. So in the Padlet is bunches of project examples, and you all probably already know these sources, but if you don't, you can go check them out. High Tech High does just the most amazing job of putting their projects out there with their project cards at Unboxed. So on the Padlet under the PBL examples column is Unboxed, as well as the must purchase book of the year. So if you don't have this book, Changing the Subject, that is just add it to the top of your list. Actually, the What School Could Be Academy, the What School Could Be community did an interview with the authors, and they did like a 4-part series over the course of the last year. If you want to go check that out, Jeff Robin was one of the authors, and he's done some PD in What School Could Be. But the point is, that book has 100 pages of great projects with spectacular imagery of what you could do in terms of a project. PBL Works has a project database as well. I've linked that up, so you can find projects to do. Like, for the most part, that is not the primary limitation of I don't have an idea. There's plenty of great ideas. It's much more difficult, though, to really have a sense of what to do with it. And I think one of the really important things that we have to recognize early is that if we want to really be authentic with PBL, it is different than just a regular project.
And a project. And if you stick around to the end, we'll give you one similarity between project-based learning and a project. The first key difference between project-based learning and a project is the launch of the project. A traditional project often has the project at the very end, meaning all the work has been happening, and then the most engaging work has been at the end. I know of one social studies teacher that had a fantastic project. It was I am declarations, and learners loved it. But to get to that point, they had to learn the different pieces of Declaration of Independence, and they just tromped through it like they were sludging through mud. They loved the project. Except, well,
we'll just stop there. Sorry, I'll jump us forward. I want to highlight this slide that Ryan with Magnify, who I recommended last time, you remember, uses all the time. And this is actually from New Tech Network, and how New Tech tries to teach PBL inside of the New Tech Network. But the normal way that we do learning has a series of steps that will typically lead to a project at the end. So if you look at our average elementary schools, we'll see some projects. It's usually after testing is where we put those. Where doing a PBL unit for real, you got to launch into the event with an entry point. You got to have a driving question. You have to sort of, it does take a very different structure up front. And that is hard. And I think we need to recognize how hard that is. And that's what's driving, I think, a lot of the limitations that you all were discussing out in breakout. One more from Ryan in terms of at what level do we need to be in order to feel comfortable doing some large scale PBL?
So here are the main guideposts that you want to hit while you're defining your path. The first is you want to train your staff to expert. Have you ever had a staff member go to a conference and then they come back and say, this was so good, I want everybody to learn it? And you're like, oh, okay, that sounds great. Let's teach everybody. How does that eventually go when somebody says, well, what does this look like with our struggling learners? What does this look like with high ability? And your staff member who's excited, and rightfully so, because there's a lot of potential in this idea, they're not an expert in it. They listen to an hour from an expert at a conference. They're not an expert yet. You need to train your people to expert. That goes for project-based learning. It goes for PLCs. Whatever your initiative is, you shouldn't have 48 of them. You should have a couple of core initiatives that you really buy into as a leader, and your staff will follow you. You need to have local experts. You say the same thing at Magnify Learning. We want to train you to where your people are PBL certified. You have your own experts. I don't want you to rely on us forever to be experts. Outside experts are really important in some cases. You need to have trained experts on your staff. And that's experts with an S. You need to have multiple experts.
Okay. So I think Ryan is giving a good sense of the kind of depth you need to be at in order to feel comfortable doing large scale PBL. Let me give you an example now that I got to see on our book tour as we went around and visited 30 schools across the United States and a few internationally that were doing this work. This is from STEM School Chattanooga, which this is the outside of STEM School Chattanooga. It is otherwise an abandoned warehouse that has a couple of cute images on the side of Nikola Tesla and folks like that. Here is the most important thing I want to show you, though. This is what a wall-to-wall PBL school looks like. And this is the 11th grade projects and all the PBL units that they were doing that year. What's important about this is when we walked into the building, this was right up front. It was actually about 7 or 8 steps from the front door. In that, like, all of the projects are pre-packaged, built out, ready to go the day that they're opening school that year. That's the sort of preparation level that it sort of takes. Now, we'll backward map about how they got to that point. I'll show you a couple more pictures of what this looks like. They also integrate some mini PBLs, particularly for their 12th graders, because their 12th graders only have senior project. Senior project is driving the curriculum, so students are making their own choices about the project that they want to run that year. So it's a student-led project. But then there's mini PBLs going on during the 12th grade year. And then everything gets built out with these unit plan templates that sort of lay out, like, what is this PBL about? And you can see that there's a kickoff event. They even have decided what day is our kickoff on that particular PBL. Now, good news, team, you're going to get to see all of this in detail, as deep as you want to go, because this school is amazing about sharing. But this is Tony Donan, who is the principal of that school, talking about how they got to that point, right? Like, we all have a dream in our head that maybe someday we'll have these amazing schools that are just projects all the time. But to get to that level is no small task. And so Tony's going to give a sense of how they got there.
That all happened the first year, and we began to piece together, okay, how do we want to take these things? Let's go what has and just copy and paste it. Even though it's great stuff, we had to make it fit our scheme, right? You gotta make it yours. That's the leadership part of it. You want the people in your building to feel like they are part of creating something and that they own that work, as opposed to you hand over a template and they just go, all right, you just gave me a template and now you just want me to follow the template. That's not why most people get into teaching. Most people get into teaching to connect with kids, create things, to create experiences. So that's building ownership with them. So it was sort of like learning what other people did, but then building our own. So when we went into the second year, we decided, hey, we have a really bad unit plan model. Like, our unit plan model, we would if somebody came and said, hey, not like the ones you saw on the wall, if somebody had come that first year and said, hey, show me the unit plan, we all would have been like embarrassed. We would have been like, please don't make us show you the plan that we did. Like, it's not worthy to share. So we decided going into the second year, our goal by the end of the second year was to have unit plans that we wouldn't be embarrassed. It wasn't even having unit plans that would be amazing. It would be unit plans that would not embarrass us when we shared them with other people. And so we spent the second year stealing, copying. We found a school, Innovation Academy, that was in Kingsport, Tennessee. That was a middle school that had a really good template.
Okay, we can stop there. And let me just sort of show you then the back end of everything going on at that particular school. So over in the Padlet again, and Ben drop the link in the Padlet and chat again, so you all can see it. So STEM Chattanooga examples is a column here. And you can see all the other stuff we've even talked about so far. We're going quickly, but you can find the links to Unbox and PBL Works and all those amazing examples. And here's the book that I'm like, you got to go get that book. But under this particular one, I want to give you a sense. There's the whole interview that we did, the Deeper Learning Details interview with Tony Donan, that you can go watch the whole thing. And Ben said the audio wasn't good. So my fault, I didn't check the right box. I apologize, team. But here is the great news. So when you go to their website, and I'll pop this one up first because this is just to their general website, and you can see under programs, our curriculum, they have PBL and then PBL curriculum units. That takes you to this page. And here is all of the unit plans going back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years worth of unit plans that you can go and check out. So everything that I just showed you that was on that wall of all the PBLs that it was taking to run the entire building, wall-to-wall PBL, everything is here, including their mini unit PBLs, right? So maybe you're not ready to go full on with these sort of multi-week PBLs, but you can go click out on one of these. Once you click into one of these, so this is the most recent year, these will then take you into a Google Drive. And here is 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. So we can just like pop open 10th grade. And inside of 10th grade, as soon as this loads, is some of the PBLs that they are running for 10th grade. So just to give you a sense of the kind of structure and rigor and depth it's sort of taking to be that sort of wall-to-wall PBL, and then you can just pop any one open and they'll sort of give it a sense, right? So this is actually going to kick off at the beginning of the year in August. And then here they have their culminating event. They've already sort of timed up what things are hitting on what days, what's the integration between math and English and chemistry for the 10th graders. So all of that sort of lives inside of there. You can see the rubric that they're going to use to judge the project at the end. Even a pacing guide. Wow, that's amazing. So, and that's just a random one that I clicked on, right? I didn't know that in advance. They're all like that. That, though, gives you a sense of sort of how intense the build sort of needs to become for you to feel comfortable being wall-to-wall PBL. This is why I'm asking you for strategic patience. But what I'm simultaneously asking you for is really robust leadership. You don't get to that point of having that kind of structure without some pretty serious leadership going on in the front end, right? That kind of structure is not just going to randomly emerge from the building. The teachers want it. If you listen to that whole interview with Tony, like they were craving more structure. That first year was a mess. And like, if you've experienced trying to do a bunch of PBL, you've probably experienced the mess and all those limitations that we talked about to kick off today. But that there is a path through it. It relies heavily on leadership. And so that is sort of a critical puzzle piece with PBL that you have to really be strategic, exercise patience, and build structure before you launch off into a crazy, we're going to do PBL all the time for everybody. Okay, I saw a hand raised. Yeah, Ben, jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we got some really good stuff going on in the chat. People were sharing some really good stuff earlier. And then, you know, stuff like HR may be an issue. So like staff turnover can be very difficult. Project management skills, like, that's a totally different skill. Like project management is different. And then if, like you mentioned, Justin, and also in the video, like, if you're going to ask somebody to do something, you need to show them how to do it and give them the support and training they need to be successful. So yeah, really good stuff. Misconceptions around PBL is a barrier, or like a dessert, it's like what you do for fun after the real learning is done. So really good. But one question that Crosby asked was, how much of the year of unit plans were on that wall that you showed? Was that a semester or an entire year?
Those were entire years, but I don't think you must have entire years. That represents a couple things going on there. Number one, it was a startup school and it was empowered to be PBL based, right? So it was like the community expected that. So that is, not everyone is in that situation, and most of the professional development, many of you in the room are professional developers. The folks you have in your audiences most of the time are not necessarily startup schools. A couple of you in the room are startup schools, so yay. But like, you can break that down into a semester, break it even down into quarters, and you also don't necessarily need to have every single subject built out. But any PBL takes that kind of structure in advance, not the depth of it, but some piece of that structure, in order to sort of have a successful PBL that everyone sort of feels good about and reduces the mess and the complexity and all of those limitations that we started the conversation with. Great question, Crosby. Other questions?
You can come off mute if anybody has a question.
That's fine.
I have a question, Justin. What do you think are the limitations of project-based learning?
I remember Jeff Robin, one of the authors of that book that I told you to go buy. He was the art teacher at High Tech High, and he was the founding art teacher, the teacher that started with High Tech High in very year one of High Tech High's existence. So had that very similar conversation. I think, Ben, you were actually with us at a bar here in Lexington, was having a conversation with him.
May or may not have been there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're not going to claim that. So asked him the same question, like, how far are you actually going? And he was pretty honest and said that, like, look, math is a problem. And I think when I was in the breakout room and I heard you talking about literacy and numeracy, and it doesn't lend itself well to practical skills. I think on the numeracy side, even High Tech High would say, like, there's parts of state mandated mathematics that just don't lend itself well. And by trying to force fit it, they made it harder than it needed to be. And so at one point, High Tech High did everything else in projects and then taught math on the side. And so, like, that's a reality check on all of this. Not everything is going to be PBL all the time, nor do I think it should be. That's where I'm personally at. Like, I love the progressive constructivist way of doing it and letting students drive questions. For your average American, I can't speak to the average Qatari, but the average American school, that's too much. Like, some balance in between is the place that we really need to sort of arrive comfortably at, where we have. So at STEAM, the school that we built, my goal was I wanted minimally from each teacher 2 serious projects per year. For a brand new teacher, that would just be 1 project per year. Just to make sure you're doing something. Like, the acceptable place to be was you couldn't be at no projects. That was an unacceptable place to be.
Yeah, and I know some teachers really like the workshop model, and so they, because especially young kids, they learn through play. Like, play is the work of the child, right? And so what they'll do is they'll use the workshop model to introduce key concepts, and then through the projects, the students are able to play with the ideas and skills and then develop them in ways that work for them. And so they sort of kick things off and build that intrinsic motivation through that workshop model. But then the project is a space for students to really take it and run with it and connect with those skills and dispositions that really sort of sit well with them, and then they expand those in the projects. So like sort of Justin said, it's not a, it's just like when we talk inquiry, some people think inquiry is like, just let the kids think about things all day long. It's actually, no, you can actually add structure, but leverage the natural curiosity of children to allow them to explore new ideas or go deeper with specific ideas, if you allow a little bit of inquiry and allow the little agency at the upfront.
Kristen has asked a question in chat, which Mark has seconded, around time and time for teachers to be creative together, innovate together. It is a serious challenge, right? So that's a very real challenge in the American way of doing school that feels like we need to sort of supervise the kids at all times. Not all systems globally feel the same need to supervise the kids at all times in a room. You look at a Singapore model, for instance, and Singapore's teachers have a completely different schedule, much more higher ed like. Higher ed, if you think about how time is structured here in higher ed, I mean, we have classes, but then there's tons of unstructured time, which kids get in trouble with here in higher ed. But the need to structure all the time is sort of a particular challenge. So simultaneously, I think for many PBL schools, there's a little bit more unstructured time. Epic Elementary in Kansas City, Missouri comes to mind for me. Couple of really strategic choices about time. Number one, they made a structural decision about co-teaching and doing multi-age. And so essentially, they just put the teachers in the room together from the start. And that 2 teachers to one group of about 50 kids in that ballpark in an elementary context. So that's a structural choice that obviously really helps them out. But even then, though, they're not trying to fill every single minute of every single day. There is a lot of sort of kid work time, and that kid work time is also teacher collaboration time.
And also you see often when you talk to schools that implementation dip, because this is a new way of doing school. Like, kids are pretty good at doing school, and they're pretty good at making you think that you're doing a really good job, right? That's like the job of the student often. But once they realize that, they're publicly showing their work, they're standing up and saying, this is the work that I have done, this is my learning. The second time around usually is a lot better because they have more ownership over, what they've produced. So I think, like Justin said earlier, like strategic patience, it takes time.
You do get, there are efficiencies. So like, they're not at STEM School Chattanooga, they're not rebuilding that wall from scratch every year, right? There's a lot of projects that are running year after year. They're making slight tweaks to something that they've already had success with. And so the initial effort is pretty big, but you will then gain the efficiencies from being able to implement a project time after time. Okay, look, thanks team. We're gonna do a little piece on leadership, then we're gonna take a really big hard transition. So let me turn over to Ben, because we just really centered leadership. Remember, success or not in going to this kind of scale of PBL is gonna depend a lot on leadership. And so a lot of you are out there working with leaders, training leaders. And so we wanted to pause for a minute here and just think about leadership and let Ben do some guiding. And then we'll circle back to getting into some other stuff.
All right. So let's, it is funny because many of you may have, heard of Bowman and Deal. So we're going to talk a little bit about like 4 frames and sort of how you can reframe or how you can use frames to sort of help see a situation or an initiative more holistically. And then we'll talk a little bit about power, power dynamics, and the different types of power and sources of power. So if if you've been in any of our sessions, you know that I'm like a huge fan of like structured thinking and protocols, et cetera. And so I found this super helpful when I started my my PhD work, and I use this quite often. And I often talk with leadership about implementing new initiatives, and I often share this this sort of 4-frame approach, and most people find it really helpful. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. And if you find it useful or not. So there's 4 frames. The first, I jump forward here, is structural. All right, there's structural, human resource, political, and symbolic. So structural frame is sort of the frame that most of us feel very comfortable in. All right, and the structural frame is basically emphasizes structures. So processes, schedules, policies, procedures, hierarchies, organizational charts, programs, personnel assignment, resource allotment, et cetera, et cetera. All right. And so, this is sort of like, if we have a problem, let's create a procedure for that, or let's create a rule, or let's create, we're going to organize things by creating rules and assigning people specific tasks, right? That's going to solve all our problems, right? Okay. But we know that actually that's one of the frames. So another frame is the human resource frame. All right. And human resource frame actually, let me mention quickly here. When you look at a specific situation, you look at the same situation and you cycle through each frame. Okay. So you look at one situation like a new initiative. Let's say we're rolling out PBL. Someone asks, okay, what about time? A super valid question, right? How are we going to structure our time? How are we going to, move kids through the day? Where are they going, et cetera, et cetera. All right. But then let's shift to that same sort of scenario and look at it through a human resource frame. And we kind of heard this a little bit in the video. So this is an emphasis on people's knowledge, on their skills, their attitudes, their energy, their commitment, the focus, okay, and empowerment. So think about that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Psychological safety, belonging, that sort of stuff. That fits all in this human resources frame. Also, people were talking about hiring and evaluating, training people on, project management skills, et cetera, professional learning. This all fits in the human resources frame. So, you have the structural frame where we need to put rules and procedures, but then you also have a human resource frame. How am I giving people the knowledge, skills, dispositions, or attitudes, or support they need to operate within these structures that I've now created? All right. And then the next one is political. And most people have like a little bit of a reaction to the word political, okay? And it's not necessarily a bad thing, okay? Most people associate, sorry if anybody's, significant others in politics, but most people have maybe a negative connotation when it comes to political. But when we talk about political in this sense, we're talking about strategy, we're talking about tactics. Anytime there's a scarcity of resources, the political frame comes into play. So within the political frame, you're looking at building alliances, trying to solve conflict, maybe starting conflict, bargaining, negotiating. This is where power and authority come into play, all right? And so you're going to have competition between beliefs, individuals, groups, resources, belief systems. This all lives in the political frame. And it's not all negative, because you can definitely leverage these things as well. So they can go both ways. When you also think about political frame, you can think about who has specific power within your organization. And we're not just talking about people in position who have positional power, right? You have people who have expert power, or have are super attractive and well liked. All these different things. So that fits in the political frame. All right. And then you have the symbolic frame. And the symbolic frame emphasizes like that vision or that leadership, the culture, the climate, the rituals, right? It's the how we do things around here. All right. We're talking about symbols, stories, myths. All right. And you can use the symbolic frame to sort of tell the narrative. People want to know, what's the story and what's my character in that story? All right. That's the symbolic frame. And so when you look at any situation, you can cycle through those 4 frames. All right. So I'm going to create maybe a new rule or new procedure. I'm going to put some structure in this. Okay. I'm changing something. What do I need to provide my people with in order to cope with that change? How are they going to be successful? What new skills, attitudes do they need to be successful in this, right? And then who do I need to get on board, and who can I leverage, right, to make this move forward? Who's going to be maybe in opposition to this? You know, who's someone I need to get on board? Who will people listen to, right? What are the resources I need to get in line to make this successful? And then the symbolic, you know, what is that broader story? What is, when people think about that, what images come to mind? What rituals am I putting into play that allow people to engage in this thing and feel like they're a part of something and connected to something, maybe from the past going into the future? Like they say, it's their moment in the sun. So how am I creating that moment in the sun for the people at this time that allows them to understand they're going towards something in the future? All right. And then we're going to jump into power. But before I do, I just want to, pause for a second and come off share. Just real quick, not real quick, we can take our time. Does anybody have questions about sort of any of that I just covered? So those 4 frames, do you relate to one frame? We're going to have a little time in breakout rooms for you to discuss this as well. But any questions on that for me before we move on?
Yeah, jump in, Kristen.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify this 4 frames is new for me, but the thinking, I'm curious about the symbolic and the thinking behind it. It sounds like that's where we might situate motivation, just really trying to get folks to see their identities, their futures. So I'm just clarifying, really. You didn't use that language, but as you were talking, I'm like, oh, this is like imagine communities and identity and motivation.
100%.
Okay,
yep,
great.
Absolutely. And you can also pull, like, if you think about specific individuals who espouse that, then you're moving a little bit in, like, it's not like distinct, there's not distinct lines, but you're moving into a little bit of the political frame when you're pulling those people in to be sort of, your champion, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for asking that question. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, good. All right, I'll jump into these. All right, sources of power. This is fun. All right, contrary to popular belief, the influence of a leader doesn't automatically come with the individual's official position in the organization. It must be granted by those being led, right? That's what makes a leader. All right, so with that in mind, let's talk about the 6 types of power. And this is shared by French and Raven. There was initially 5. They identified 5, but then they added informational, which is the last one. All right. And so as I'm sharing these, I want you to think through and think which types of power you exercise. And then also try and imagine somebody who you work with and try and situate their sort of someone in a position of power, someone has power, situate their power. All right. So legitimate. This comes from a belief that a person has the formal right to make demands and to expect others to be compliant and obedient. All right. So this is a belief that a person has. So some people are very bossy and they actually don't have any positional power, but people think they have legitimate, authority to make them do what they want. So reward. This is a result of someone's ability to compensate another for compliance. So this is sort of a transactional in nature approach. But I can reward you. So if you do something, then I'll reward you. It could be reward you with a position or reward you with, something that you want. Expert. So this is based on a person's high levels of skill and knowledge. And I'll tell you, some of the people that actually leverage expert power quite often are the tech guys. So tech guys often get what they want because they're the expert and not many other people actually have the skill set that they do. So they get what they want based on their high level of skill and knowledge. Whether it's true or not all the time, that's a whole other discussion, but that's expert power. Referent. So referent is the result of a person's perceived attractiveness, worthiness, and right to others' respect. And so this is has nothing to do with position or expert power. It's just some of those people that have that special something, a little some extra, right? We all know those people. They're able to motivate people. They're able to get people to do things for them. They're able to move people in certain directions. And so when you think about like that political frame, people who you want on your team, if you will, are people who have a lot of referent power. All right, coercive. This comes from the belief that a person can punish others for non-compliance. And so some people use this quite a bit. And sometimes we have to use this. But some people, it seems like this is their go-to in their power toolbox, and they just sort of wield this whenever anybody doesn't do exactly what they want. All right. And then informational. All right. So this is the one that they had added on. This results from a person's ability to control the information that others need to accomplish something. So I think we've all been in the dark at some point, and you didn't have the full information we needed to make a decision. So that's a form of power. All right. And so it's sort of like a little bit like the four frames where you don't necessarily, one is not better or worse than the other. It's as a leader, you have to know when and which type of power is most appropriate for that given situation. And sometimes you may be using more than one source of power at any given time. But a lot of people think that, they don't have legitimate power, right? They don't have a position, but there's many, many different types of power. And so as you think about, moving and trying to push things forward within your organization or within your groups or within your schools, think about which types of power you have access to, which types of power you might be able to cultivate. And then think about in any given situation, if you're not really achieving what you want, try tapping into one of these other sources of power. All right. So what I want to do, or any questions on that before, I'm going to send everybody into breakout rooms and we're going to have like a brief discussion on, you get to choose. You either get to choose to have a little prompt for the four frames or a little prompt for the sources of power. So you'll get to choose with your group.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Justin.
No, go take it away, Ben. I'm sorry to jump in. It's so natural.
No, I was just going to, yeah. I was just going to ask if anybody wanted to share anything that, any thoughts or observations that came up in their rooms, related or otherwise.
I think what came up in our discussion was how complex this can get, in terms of looking through different frames and also then different types of power. And how they're all, you could draw a web between all of this and how they interact. Like if you were to look at this like from a systems level, it's one will impact the other. And also when you're trying to create change, we were talking about, well, maybe Abby should chime in here in terms of her background, but like working at a federal level in terms of trying to affect change and finding, oh, this is getting frustrating. I need to get down to like a grassroots level. And then getting frustrated because, oh, things have to change at a federal level, so like, it's just, you're just stuck in that tug of war all the time, which, yeah, that's where we left off. And then we had 4 seconds left and wanted to keep talking.
Oh, you didn't solve the problem? You just didn't.
It just got bigger. Yeah. The problem just got.
Yeah. Well, I think, Mark, you bring up a really good point too, because like this is like thinking through the 4 frames and the 6 types of power. It's supposed to help you sort of take multiple perspectives, right? And allow you to see things from more than just, one point of view. It shouldn't be a burden, right? So if you find yourself trying to, justify or figure out where, it fits and, making all these different connections, and that starts taking away from your thinking. You know, if that cognitive load is too high, then just forget it. You know, just stop. So it's meant to help you, you know, make better decisions and take a more holistic view. So it's not like you have to categorize everything, right? Because it really doesn't really matter, right? It's just that it's supposed to a tool to help you. So keep that in mind.
I think it made me think a lot about the difference between like the power that like you occupy as an individual versus like maybe the power that you're trying to support or cultivate in those you work with. So working like for a school district, right? I think about the district leadership role, but also we work with individual schools and we are trying to support individual schools in these like huge redesign efforts. And like, what are the school leaders' responsibilities? What frames are they working in? What frames can they work in? And how are we either in tension to what Mark was saying or supporting that leadership and that sort of like vision reframing?
Amazing. Yeah. Very good. Thanks for sharing that. All right. Justin, we got a lot to get through and not a lot of time.
Well, we're going to take a really big transition here right now, like huge turn. We had set you up for this power dynamic because we're about to really complicate this space. So I'm going to share back and we're going to do a couple things that tee us up for Thursday. And then Thursday is what's going to take us into sort of our first break where you all can go out and gather some data and be reflective. So remember, a lot of what we're trying to do in the What School Could Be Academy is building puzzle pieces and helping you fit the puzzle together. This is in our research around deeper learning leadership, everything I've ever seen around this space, this puzzle piece must be there, and it must be there early. And it relates to power, and that is a really clear vision linking equity and deeper learning. So let me transition us out of PBL. This is the last PBL video we are going to do for a while. We'll maybe touch it again towards the end, but we're going to close the book on PBL now. In that, like, Chris Emden is going to give us a little bit of a mandate about like what should we be doing with these PBLs once we have them in our building. Oh, I want to stop. Hold on. I want to get this right. I'm going to reshare and get the audio right this time. Sorry, team. Okay.
With project-based learning and instruction, we have what I would argue is the best PPE for educators who are working within the pandemic of state-sanctioned violence. We have this tool that we can use to be able to mask a lot of the deficiencies of the existing pedagogy. We can engage in projects with young folks where they are doing things and creating things. But I want to implore us that in this moment, there is no project that we can create if it is not first focused on the needs of young people, if they're not defining for us the type of projects that they need, if the projects that young folks are creating are not addressing racism, they're not addressing their realities and their experiences, they're not speaking truth to power about how they're being harmed by this moment, by how they're trying to still make sense of this moment, then we're not doing the work. Project-based learning is an anchor for social justice work at its very best. And if you're doing project-based learning without a focus on anti-racism in your pedagogy, then I would argue that you might as well be doing the same kind of pedagogies that other folks are doing. And digital project-based learning is also important. How are you utilizing social media as a way to be able to garner communities with young people where they can invite their peers to engage in dialogue and speak truth to power? How are you utilizing TikTok as a way for them to be able to create a new page and a whole new project where they can bring a cadre of folks together to not just advocate for their experiences, but also address race and racism and how they're being impacted by it? How are educators thinking about project-based learning, not just as a random project that we're doing, but looking at ourselves as a project to create? And I would argue that project-based learning is not just about what you do, it's also about what you deconstruct, what you reimagine, and what you reconstruct. And that trifecta of first deconstructing existing norms, reimagining what a future could be, and then doing the work to make something that speaks to the imagination, that the imagination is a first step, but the activation of the imagination through the creation of a project is the final frontier. That is the work. And look at yourself, guys, and deconstruct you. How have I been complicit in race-based practices that do not allow all young people to come alive? How have I been utilizing the curriculum as a baton that I swing at young folks to harm them? How are my state standards that I am following to a T impeding my ability to be the kind of person that stands in the gap for young folks and makes them alive? And when you're creating yourself as a project, I would make the argument that you are deconstructing yourself as just an educator. You're imagining new possibilities for young folks and for yourself. And then you're building yourself back up to be not just a pedagogue, but a person that uses their pedagogy as protest. Project-based learning is pedagogy for emancipation. Project-based pedagogy educators utilize their work as protest. You might not be able to march, but you can use the work that you do every day with young people as an opportunity to transform the world. And although short, and although succinct, that small concept of reimagining ourselves, reimagining our pedagogy, and nesting our projects and how we build ourselves up, and how we allow young folks to be able to build projects that speak to their truths and their authenticities and their realities is the final frontier of the work.
All right. So nothing like a little Chris in the morning to get you up and going and feeling good about it. So I let that entire video play from Chris because this is an important, really critical piece now of what we are going to do. Let me get ourselves moving forward here. The reason that we need to wrestle with something right up front, and we're not going to understand all this today. We're going to pick this up on Thursday and then move ourselves forward, okay? But 10 years ago, João Almeida put this article out in Education Week in a blog that deeper learning has a race problem. It's something that we need to be hyper cognizant of. And the whole article is linked in the Padlet and you can go read it. And then there's a response article that happens. You can read that one too. But one of the really critical pieces that we hear a lot when we do this work with educators is that, like, oh yeah, this has been happening. This is what the gifted program looks like. Like, you know, our gifted programs tend to be more project-based and deeper learning driven. And so there's this real question of sort of equitable deployment of skills that lives in this space. And that article has a bunch of reasons why we can't deploy deeper learning equally to all populations, you know, all the reasons we give ourselves excuses about how we you know, are only giving sort of the highest quality curriculum to some students. Linda Darling Hammond puts out this, like, she historically contextualizes it. Again, this is in the Padlet. We can't watch it all today, but just to give you a quick taste.
Wade Henderson left off. Deeper learning has long been contentious and viewed as not appropriate for all students. And that's part of the history that we are needing to confront as we move forward. I was recently talking to somebody about a school that's kind of a progressive school that has been engaged in a very inquiry-oriented curriculum for a very long time, and their label is 21st century education since the 19th century, right? Because some of these ideas are not new. But there has been a long tug of war about who is going to get access to a thinking curriculum, to a curriculum that is empowering. As Wade said, true education opens us up to our full potential, that empowers us, power with a capital P. I think that's a really good way for us to think about it. He mentioned W.B. Du Bois. Well, Du Bois was in a tug of war rhetorically in a discourse about the education of Black children with Booker T. Washington. There was a very big, well, it wasn't, and Booker T. Washington was not the only person representing that point of view. But in fact, in building schools for Black children in the South, philanthropists were also struggling with whether those would be focused on menial work, so that there would not be access to the classics, to a liberal arts education, but there would be a lot of coursework around literally sweeping and plowing and doing the menial chores that were viewed as the appropriate life aspirations for the Black community.
So I want to contextualize this, and that's a lot to unpack there. You can go watch the whole video. And I know that I'm opening a whole bunch of complex doors as we're sort of near closing up shop for today. But we're opening these doors for a purpose. This work is critical to embed in opportunity. deeper learning and equity of opportunity must fit tightly together like a puzzle. They must live together. This quote from Schools of Opportunity I love. This deeper learning work is the attempt to mount the sustained effort to try to close gaps in opportunity, not only the gaps in achievement that we see on the back side of it. These two pieces live together fundamentally, and you'll see that in our Next Gen 9 that we use here at UK, and you'll see it all the time if you're looking closely, but it's important to be overt early that this is equity work, that deeper learning work is equity work. And the other way around, you can take that road the other way, that equity work would inevitably take you towards deeper learning work. So for us in our Next Gen 9, you can see we sort of have 5 sort of deeper learning principles and 4 equity of opportunity principles that help drive all the stuff that we try to help lead and shape here in Kentucky. Linda and Kia have put out a recent book. This has just come out within the last year, The Civil Rights Road to Deeper Learning, if you want to sort of continue to unpack that. Inside of that book, they lay out sort of 5 critical sort of civil rights essentials to allow all kids, as Linda said, to have access to a thinking curriculum. And I love how she says that. That's a bit of narrative language that you should like put in your own backpack. Who has access to a thinking curriculum? That question we should be asking ourselves all the time in the school context. To get to that thinking curriculum, they lay out these 5 component parts. As educators, we don't necessarily control all of those component parts, but we do control some of them, right? We can control safe and inclusive schools. We can have an impact on quality teaching. And in our context for deeper learning, we can really have a great quality curriculum for all kids. These things map ourselves nicely right back to the science of learning. Remember where we were last week, and we're going to ground this whole academy in the science of learning. What do we know about how kids learn deeply, well, durably? We know it takes all of these component parts. And so unsurprisingly, the pieces that we need here map really nicely, including the quality curriculum, PBL, all of that stuff, the case that Chris just laid out, right? Like, this can be a liberatory endeavor. Now, I know we are reaching the end of time. And so let me transition us quickly to a brief discussion as we set up the work ahead. I've gotten to visit schools when we did the Leadership for Deeper Learning book. This is a Casco Bay High School in Portland, Maine. It is a school of opportunity, and I haven't even told you what that is, but in the Padlet, there is a whole column about schools of opportunity. What are schools of opportunity? How would we know if a school is an school of opportunity or not? Like, there's a rubric inside of that. Anyway, I've gotten to see it, and we went and looked at all these different schools. One of the real clear pieces that is super clear in the research that we got to do across these schools is, for every single leader of these deeper learning schools, there was this restlessness toward equity every single time. And equity was a critical driver of why. You know, to the great question from Simon Sinek, start with why. All of the time, leaders, when you ask them why, they would go almost immediately to equity as the reason why. And I think for us in deeper learning, we love all the shiny objects of deeper learning, the fancy PBLs, the great exhibition nights, the parking lots that are full for exhibition night. We'll talk about that in our second big sprint. However, like, that's not as clear of a reason why as equity is it clear as of a reason why. And we saw it so consistently that I think we must put it in as a critical early puzzle piece that we have to have as we sort of move into this deeper learning work together. As we move forward, I'll get us to the discussion. I'll show you what we're going to do on Thursday, then we'll just use the rest of the time for discussion. On Thursday, we're going to center students in this effort. We're going to embrace an idea called liberatory design And we're going to sort of set ourselves up for how do we begin to center students in this work. If we center students and we are designing in a liberatory way for them to sort of all have access to this great thinking curriculum, we're going to find ourselves getting to deeper learning. So we'll engage on that task on Thursday. But here is sort of whole group discussion. We don't need to go out to breakouts, Ben. Let's just like hang out in the room and talk. How can we be more clear in our own leadership that advancing deeper learning is also advancing equity of opportunity? Like, is that super clear to all of you at this point? What questions do you have? And then how can we help others be clear about that in their own work?
I'll jump in and just say what I'm observing across Kentucky. In my current work, I'm in and out of a whole lot of districts, and I'm doing strategic planning with 3 right now. And I will tell you, in all 3 of those, the word equity is a hot button that you've got to figure out how to talk about the work without using the word. It's that hot. And I have never seen, in my years in education in Kentucky, I don't think I've ever seen a time when public education is more politically charged. And, it's really trying to bring power to the right. And whether you're right or left is not the point of what I'm saying. It's just, that's the movement. And so in the deeper learning world in Kentucky, I feel like what I'm seeing is that we have to be really creative in how we address equity and leave out the hot button words just so we can get to the conversation about what kids need and how to do what's right for kids. So that's what I'm seeing.
Good. Thanks, Jim.
Mark, did you want to talk about that? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm just, by the way, I think our silence is that we're thinking about what you're saying. I just wrote in the chat that the word equity is often ambiguous at times. I don't mean that it's totally ambiguous, but I remember watching Ken Robinson's talk on creativity this many years ago. And I don't want to change the word equity, but for me, he was trying to promote equity. To a certain extent, and so it's a big term, I guess, that can encompass a lot of different things. But what it means is we're trying to access and equity. There's you could draw a line between those words, I think. But I think part of that's what I'm struggling with right now, is how to wrap the semantics around the word, because I think we do get tripped up, as James said, in the conversations, and sometimes people will shut down.
Yeah,
but we can't avoid it. We've got to, they need to hear it. We just got to, like you say, bypass the tripping up place so that we can get them to talk about the challenges for kids, because kids are struggling.
Yes. Agreed.
Indeed. I'm not naive to the reality. And that Chris Imden video, it's one that I'm thinking about the different contexts that we could show that Chris Imden video in and really blow up a conversation. And I understand that is challenging for a lot of folks. A couple of thoughts for me. Number one, it is critical. I mean, educators are empathetic, passionate people that want kids to succeed. This speaks to who educators are, the reason that they're in the job in the first place. So this is a real empowerment for them in particular. The second thing is that we're not going to just leave you hanging on you got to go be equity warriors and we're not going to give you tools to do it. We are going to give you some tools on Thursday, right? So one of the things that we found that is so critical is when adults want to have these conversations, adults are pretty dug in and they have their worldviews pretty locked or whatever. And of course, there's movement on that over time. We got great questions from Crosby earlier about growing leaders. Leaders really can grow. I've grown a lot in my own career. And so people do grow and change. But what is a super powerful thing to do in this space is center the students. it's a lot harder for adults to say that students are wrong, or that if students want this thing, we're not going to give them that thing. And so like strategically, that's the pathway that we want you to pursue, is sort of students at the center. And when we're centering students, we're going to be making better equity choices more consistently. We're going to talk about things like street data next time. If you don't have that book, Street Data, go get it, love it. And so there's a pathway to it. We'll give you tools for it, but it's so consistent in the deeper learning leadership world. This is such a consistent driver that it is a piece that you, and I agree, it's something you wrestle with. I had to wrestle with. We all sort of have to find how we have those conversations with community, but it's so consistent that I'm not sure you can really sustain deeper learning work without having the linkage to, we're doing this because it's a better opportunity for all kids.
And we have to remember that we're not necessarily serving even the kids that are working under this system the best. You know, it's like we want to transform this entire system and provide a better education for all kids across the board.
Well, thank you all for just sort of sitting with it. Okay, jump in, Mark.
No, I was going to say, so then in terms of like equity equals student-centered, is that sort of a summary of what you just said?
It's a pretty good default. Students are gonna, when you ask students what do they want, the first thing they're gonna say is like, the cafeteria food sucks, make that better.
Every time.
Yeah, exactly, right? So like, this is not like the first thing that comes out of kids' mouths is how we're gonna build the whole school model, right? This is a negotiation. It takes leadership and power. That's why we're centering leadership today, because you can see like we've just made it heavy and hard on all of you as leaders, and a lot of you are in the PD world and you're helping others come to this work. And so like that's you know, part of your role as a PD leader is like, how do, just like James was saying, like, how do we navigate this right now in this hyper political world that we're in, when we as educators sort of know what's best for kids, and you can let us move forward towards what's best for kids within this complex environment. So student-centered is a good default position. We're going to start with that default position, but that doesn't mean that kids are always, you know, like our professional judgment as educators has a lot to say here. And at the end of the academy, we're going to cycle in where the most natural starting place for everybody, and that's where James is at right now with school districts in West Kentucky, is in Portrait of a Learner discussions. And that's a very adult-centered discussion. And so like there's a place for adults to have those conversations. But for us as educational leaders, we're really going to center learners, especially early in our design choices. So we'll get to that on Thursday when we meet again. Thank you for opening this door with us. This is one of the more complex doors that we open during the academy. And so thanks for spending that time. And I'm excited to hear, as you guys have a couple of days to think about it on Thursday when we get back together, like, how does this make sense? How are you making sense of it all?
Yeah, and so you know me and my thinking routines. On the Padlet, there's a Connect Extend challenge for you all. You don't have to do it now, but you know, if you don't do it now, you won't do it, right? So we'll hang up and let you get on with your day. But we covered a lot today. So what did you connect with? What extended your thinking? And what's currently challenging your thinking? Let us know. We got your feedback from the last Padlet. We incorporated into today's. You know, we know that you like discussions and you like you know, keeping them about the right length or a little bit longer than we had in the past. And it really helps us sort of target our you know, our session together when we realize, you know, what was connecting, what questions you still had outstanding, what worked, what didn't work. So thanks so much for all the feedback. All right, we're gonna send everybody off. Justin, anything else before we go?
No, just that we're nearing the end of sprint one. This stuff moves fast. Sorry, team. I mean, we don't have a lot of time. It's early mornings, Janelle. I see Janelle like rubbing her temples like, holy smokes. I know, I'm sorry. But we're just trying to be efficient with your time. And so we'll touch base on Thursday. We'll wrap up sprint one on deeper learning structures with this sort of task of go get some data from kids. And then when we take a break, we'll take a week-long break as you maybe go have some conversations with kids. Then we'll actually start to build out the real structure. So the real structure that leaders are going to build early is not all this PBL stuff that we showed you early. We show you that because I want you to see we're going to get there. We're going to get to the fun stuff and all of the amazing, but like the real structural build that's up first is assessment. And so after we take our week-long break, we come back around and we talk assessment, and then we come back around later to how we fit the projects in. Okay, wild and crazy. We'll hang in the room, but thank you all for joining this morning.
Yeah, great work, everybody.